He was already being counted as a goodbye. In the far corner of the county animal control building, behind a dented steel door and beneath a flickering strip of fluorescent light, Rex lay curled on a thin gray blanket that smelled faintly of bleach, wet concrete, and old fear. He was a German shepherd once trained for discipline, precision, and trust, but none of those words were written on the clipboard hanging outside his kennel now. The paper clipped there called him unstable, unadoptable. Final review at 8 a.m. The hallway was narrow and cold, the kind of cold that settled into metal bowls and cinder block walls and never really left. Somewhere deeper in the building, a smaller dog barked once, then stopped, as if even sound had learned to keep its head down in this place. The air carried the tired hum of overworked vents, the sharp sting of disinfectant, and the stale weight of too many endings packed too close together. Rex did not bark. He did not pace. He did not bare his teeth at the footsteps that passed. That was what unsettled the staff the most. They had expected rage from a dog with his file. Instead, they got silence. A silence so complete it felt like the last room in a church after everyone else had gone home. His sable coat, dark along the spine and dusted with dull tan at the legs and chest, had lost the clean sheen of a working dog. The fur around his neck stood uneven where an old collar had rubbed the same spot too many times. One ear held straight. The other tipped slightly at the edge as if even cartilage could grow tired. His body was still powerful, but it was the stillness of him that carried the real weight now. He looked like something built for service, and then left behind by the very hands that once praised him for it. At the front desk, a wall clock ticked with a kind of cruel patience. 7:42. 18 minutes until the shelter veterinarian was due to come down the hall and make one more attempt to assess whether there was anything left worth saving. Warden Blake Mercer stood near the coffee machine, reading through Rex's notes for what might have been the 6th time that morning. Former K9. Retired after incident. Multiple failed placements. Stress. Triggers. Loud metal contact, sudden male approach, confinement transitions. Exercise extreme caution. Mercer exhaled through his nose and rubbed a hand over his jaw. He was not a cruel man. Men like him rarely were. But buildings like this taught people to translate mercy into paperwork. Beside him, Dr. Hannah Pierce flipped through another chart, her dark hair tied back, reading glasses low on her nose. She had the tired, careful face of someone who spent her days trying to do right in a system built around urgency and shortage. He hasn't eaten much, she said quietly. Drank some water around 5. No aggression this morning. Mercer glanced toward the hall. That's supposed to help his case? Hannah closed the folder. No. I'm just saying he knows. That was the part no one liked to say out loud. Dogs knew more than people could bear. They knew the sound of keys that meant going outside. They knew the smell of rain before it arrived. And, sometimes, in places like this, they knew when the room had already made up its mind about them. A volunteer passed by with a stack of folded towels. Someone in intake coughed. A printer spat out forms in the office. Life went on in small, practical noises while Rex remained at the end of the corridor, his amber eyes open but distant, his chin resting on his paws, as if he had chosen not hope, not anger, but surrender. Then the front door opened. Not loudly. Just enough to let in a breath of winter air and the faint smell of cold pavement, wool, and black coffee from somewhere outside. A man stepped in slowly, tapping a white cane once against the worn tile before folding it with practiced hands. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, moving with the deliberate balance of someone who had learned a new geography after losing the old one. His coat was marine green. His hair was cut short, military clean. A pale scar ran from just above his brow toward his temple. He could not see the room, but somehow the room saw him all at once. "Morning," he said, voice low and even, carrying that unmistakable steadiness some men brought back from service and never really lost. "Name's Ethan Cole. I called yesterday about the retired working dog." Ethan Cole stood just inside the doorway while the warmth fled from his coat in slow waves, as if the morning itself had followed him in, and then changed its mind. He held a folded white cane in one hand and a worn leather glove in the other, his fingers moving lightly across the seams the way some men touched rosary beads when they needed to steady themselves. Warden Blake Mercer gave him the kind of look people gave without meaning to, the look reserved for men who had clearly been broken by life and yet still carried themselves like they had somewhere to report. "You came for the shepherd," Mercer said. Ethan nodded once. "That is right." Dr. Hannah Pierce stepped from behind the desk, her shoes quiet on the tile. "Mr. Cole, I am glad you made it, but I should tell you before we go any farther, this is not a normal placement. He has been through several evaluations. He does not tolerate most handlers. Loud sounds put him on edge. Sudden movement can set him off. We have had to keep him isolated." Ethan listened without interrupting. He had the stillness of someone who no longer wasted strength resisting facts. "I understand," he said. His voice was calm, but it had a worn edge to it, like wood smoothed down by years of weather. "I did not come here for easy." Hannah glanced at Mercer, then back at Ethan. "The final review is at 8 o'clock. I can give you a few minutes, but I need you to be careful. If he shows signs of distress, we end it there." Ethan gave a faint nod. "Fair enough." Mercer led them down the narrow hallway, and with every step the air seemed to grow colder. The sound changed, too. At the front of the building there had been phones, paperwork, the shuffle of routine. Back here there was only the hum of lights, the soft clink of metal, the distant rattle of a mop bucket somewhere behind a closed door. Ethan moved carefully but not hesitantly, counting space with his feet, reading the room through sound and smell, and the small draft that slipped beneath each kennel gate. When they reached the far end of the corridor, Mercer stopped. "He is in here," he said quietly. The pause that followed felt almost sacred. Inside the kennel, Rex had not moved much since Ethan arrived. He still lay on the blanket with his chin low, but his ears had changed. The straight one angled toward the door. The bent one twitched once. That was all. Yet in a place where silence usually meant resignation, this silence felt different. It felt like listening. Ethan stood a few feet back from the gate. He did not ask for a description. He did not need one. The dog's presence filled the space in a way sight never could have. There was the faint scent of damp fur and antiseptic, the subtle scrape of claws against concrete, the slow rhythm of breath held too tightly in the chest. Ethan drew in a breath of his own and let it out slow. "Hello, brother," he said softly. Mercer stiffened. Hannah looked toward Rex. The shepherd had lifted his head now. Not high. Just enough to bring the world back into focus. Ethan took one careful step closer. No sudden motion. No reaching hand. No command voice. Just a man standing in the cold with all the patience sorrow can teach. "My name is Ethan," he said. "I heard they ran out of time for you." Rex rose to his feet. The movement was fluid, controlled, almost too controlled, as if every muscle in his body had been waiting for a reason. He came forward until he stood at the gate, close enough that his breath warmed the steel bars. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not loud, not threatening, but old. The kind of sound that came from memory before it came from fear. Mercer took half a step forward. "Mr. Cole, back away." Ethan did not move. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the dog the way other men listened to a friend, trying not to cry. "No," he said quietly. "That is not anger." Hannah frowned. "You can tell that?" Ethan's hand tightened around the leather glove. "Yes," he said. "That is grief." The hallway seemed to hold its breath with Rex. Then the dog pressed his nose once, gently, against the bars, and for the first time that morning, something changed in the room. Not in the paperwork. Not on the wall clock. In the air itself. Ethan took one more small step forward until he stood close enough to hear the shepherd's breathing shift. His own voice dropped lower, softer, shaped by instinct older than thought. "Easy now," he murmured. "I am here." The sound in Rex changed first. It deepened for a moment, low and rough like a storm moving farther out instead of coming in, and Ethan heard it the way another man might have seen a shadow pass across a face. He lifted his chin slightly, listening with that grave patience the world had forced into him after darkness took the place of sight. The shepherd's breathing was still quick, but no longer sharp at the edges. It carried hesitation now. Confusion. The fragile ache of recognition trying to rise through years of hurt. Warden Blake Mercer kept one hand near the latch, but did not touch it. Dr. Hannah Pierce stood a few feet behind him, her clipboard lowered at her side, her attention fixed on the dog as if she were watching a language no one had spoken in that building for a very long time. Ethan drew in the scent of disinfectant and cold steel and tired fur, then spoke again, quieter than before, almost to himself. "You remember discipline," he said. "You remember waiting. You remember a voice that meant home." Rex took a slow step sideways inside the kennel, not away, just enough to test the edges of the moment. His nails clicked once against concrete, then settled. Ethan heard the shift in weight, the careful turn of a body built for obedience and altered by sorrow. He let the silence breathe. That was the thing people forgot. Broken creatures did not always need commands. Sometimes they needed room enough to decide whether hope was still worth the risk. Somewhere in the office, a phone rang and stopped. The wall clock at the front desk moved another minute closer to 8. Mercy, in places like this, was often measured in paper and schedule and signatures. But down at the end of that narrow hallway, time had begun to gather around something smaller and far more human. Ethan lifted the old leather glove in his hand and held it near the bars. "This belonged to my father," he said. "Marine too. Wore through the palm-working engines in North Carolina heat. Smelled like oil, cedar, and coffee for near 20 years. His mouth softened at one corner, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "I still carry it when I need courage." Rex leaned forward. Not all at once. Just an inch. Then another. His nose moved through the air in slow, careful draws, sorting the truth of the man by scent the way wounded souls do when words have failed them too many times. He smelled winter on Ethan's coat. Wool. Coffee from a roadside diner. The old leather. The faint salt of dried sweat. And beneath all of it, something deeper, harder to name but impossible to fake. Loss. Service. The long discipline of survival. Mercer finally spoke, his voice low, almost reverent without meaning to be. "What exactly are you trying to do, Mr. Cole?" Ethan did not turn. "I am trying to let him know he is not in enemy territory." Hannah looked back to Rex and saw something she had not seen in his file, not once in all the months since he had been brought in. His tail was not wagging. His ears were still high with caution. But the hardness around his eyes had shifted. The dog was listening now with his whole body, every scarred inch of him pulled between fear and wanting. Ethan moved his hand to the kennel door and rested his fingers lightly against the cold metal. Then, with the same steady tone a man might use at a graveside or in prayer, he gave the one word that had lived inside him since he first heard the notes in Rex's file, the one word he had come all this way to offer not as a command, but as a key. Marine. The effect was almost too small for anyone but Ethan to trust. Rex did not bark. He did not recoil. He went completely still, the kind of stillness that happens when pain meets memory and cannot decide which one will speak first. His head lowered by an inch. Then another. The rumble in his chest faded into silence. One paw stepped forward until it touched the bottom edge of the gate. Ethan swallowed once, and when he spoke again his voice carried that old, sacred oath men like him never quite stopped living by. "That is right," he whispered. "You are still one of us." For a long moment, nobody in the hallway moved. The fluorescent light above them gave a faint, tired buzz, and somewhere near the intake desk a printer rolled out another sheet of paper that suddenly seemed to belong to a different world. Rex remained at the kennel door with one paw set against the bottom edge of the gate, his head lowered just enough to turn caution into something softer, something almost unbearably human. Ethan kept his hand on the cold metal and did not rush the silence. He knew better than that. Some doors opened with keys. Others opened only when you stopped reaching for the handle and simply stood there long enough to be trusted. Dr. Hannah Pierce looked at the wall clock, then back at the dog. 7:53. 7 minutes until the final review. In county shelters, 7 minutes was not a poetic thing. It was a budget line. A legal window. A box on a form. Yet as she watched the old shepherd breathe in the scent of a blind marine who had walked in out of nowhere and called him by the one name that still reached him, those 7 minutes began to feel heavy with consequence. Warden Blake Mercer cleared his throat. "Doctor," he asked quietly. Hannah did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed on Rex. The file in her hand had been built from incidents, failures, warnings, and assessments made under fluorescent lights by tired people with too little time. It did not include this. It did not include the way the dog's shoulders had dropped half an inch. It did not include the strange stillness that had come over the corridor, as if every harsh thing in it had stepped back to listen. Finally she said, "Open the side room." Mercer turned toward her. "You want to move him?" "I want to postpone the review." He blinked once. "On what grounds?" Hannah lifted her chin toward the kennel. "On the grounds that for the first time since he got here, he is choosing contact over defense." Mercer hesitated, then glanced toward Ethan. "Mr. Cole, if we do this, you follow every instruction. You do not go into that kennel. You do not touch him unless I say so." "Understood." Ethan nodded without looking away from the sound of Rex's breathing. "Understood." The side evaluation room was small, warmer than the corridor by a few degrees, with a rubber mat on the floor, a stainless steel water bowl, and a lamp in the corner that gave off a weak amber glow instead of the harsh white glare overhead. It was not home. But compared to the kennel, it felt like Mercy had at least found a chair and decided to sit down. Mercer unlatched the outer gate with careful, practiced hands. The click of the mechanism sounded sharp in the hall, and Rex's body tensed at once. His head lifted. His chest tightened. Ethan heard it before anyone else did. "Easy," he said, not loudly, just steady. "No one is forcing you." Hannah watched the shepherd's ears flick back, then forward again. The dog did not lunge. He did not retreat to the back wall. He stood in place, torn between old reflex and the new, fragile thing entering the room like dawn under a door. Mercer opened the gate a few inches and stepped back. "Come on, Rex," he said, trying for gentleness, but still sounding like a man used to control. The dog did not move. Ethan shifted his weight and turned his body slightly toward the open side room, leaving space, making no demand of it. "Brother," he said softly, "you do not have to prove anything here." There it was again, that wordless pause in which grief weighed itself against trust. Then Rex stepped forward. One paw, then another. Slow enough that the sound of each nail on concrete seemed to matter. He crossed the threshold without drama, without triumph, carrying the worn dignity of something that had once served with honor and had not yet forgotten. When he entered the side room, the air changed with him. Mercer shut the gate behind them and let out a breath he had been holding too long. Hannah placed the clipboard on the counter and rubbed at the bridge of her nose. 24 hours, she said at last, her voice low and tired and unexpectedly kind. That is what I can give before the paperwork comes back. Ethan stood very still, as if the words were too precious to move around too quickly. 24 hours is a lifetime, he said. Rex circled once on the rubber mat, then stopped near the lamp where the light touched the rough edges of his coat and turned them almost warm. He did not lie down yet. He simply turned his head toward Ethan and listened, like a soldier in the dark waiting to hear whether the voice beside him intended to stay. The side room held the kind of quiet that did not belong to buildings made of cinder block and county budgets. It was a borrowed quiet, thin as paper, but real enough to rest inside for a while. The amber lamp in the corner cast a softer light across the rubber floor, and for the first time that morning, Rex was not framed by bars. He stood near the wall with his body angled toward Ethan, not relaxed, not yet, but no longer braced against the world like a soldier expecting the next blow to come from any direction. Ethan lowered himself carefully into the metal chair against the far side of the room, setting his folded cane beside one boot and the old leather glove across his knee. He did not reach for the dog. He did not fill the room with too many words. He simply sat there and let his breathing settle into a rhythm honest enough for another wounded creature to trust. Through the narrow window in the door, Hannah could see them both. The blind Marine in his worn green coat. The retired shepherd under the amber light. Two lives that looked different from the outside and carried the same fracture underneath. Mercer stood beside her with a styrofoam cup of coffee gone lukewarm in his hand. "You really think this changes anything?" he asked in a voice meant to stay practical. Hannah kept her gaze on the room. "I think it tells us we were reading the wrong story." Mercer looked down at the file. The incident reports were not invented. "No," Hannah said. "But reports only describe the moment a wound bleeds. They do not tell you what caused it to open." Inside, Ethan spoke as if he were continuing a conversation neither of them had known they started years ago. "I lost my sight outside Fallujah," he said quietly. "Not all at once. At first it was smoke, then light, then shapes that would not hold still. Then one morning at Bethesda, I woke up and the world had gone somewhere I could not follow." Rex remained standing, but one ear shifted toward the sound of Ethan's voice, and that small movement felt larger than speech. Ethan ran a thumb over the seam of the old glove. "People were kind for a while. Kind in that careful way folks are when they do not know if you are still a man or something more fragile now. They held doors, lowered their voices, told me I was strong. Then they went home. My unit moved on. My fiancé moved on." The phone stopped ringing one call at a time. He gave a soft breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Funny thing about losing the light. What hurts is not always the dark. Sometimes it is how fast the world learns to look past you." Outside the room, Mercer said nothing. Hannah folded her arms more tightly, not against the cold, but against the truth of that sentence. Rex took one slow step toward Ethan and lowered his head enough to scent the air again. The dog's breathing was still cautious, but it had changed shape. It no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like listening. Ethan turned his face slightly toward him, and in that simple motion there was no pity, no fear, no hunger to fix what had already been broken. Only recognition. "They did something similar to you, did not they?" he asked. "You served. You obeyed. You carried what they asked you to carry. Then one day your grief became inconvenient." Rex blinked once. His amber eyes, dulled by months of fluorescent loneliness, caught the lamp and held it. Hannah reached down to the counter and pulled open the file all the way, not to read the warnings this time, but the older records underneath. Transfer history. Training notes. Handler assignment. Retirement summary. Her gaze stopped on a line buried 3 pages deep. Primary handler deceased during overseas deployment. Dog reassigned. Failed reintegration. Behavioral decline after repeated transport. She closed her eyes for half a second. "Oh," she whispered. Mercer looked over. "What is it?" Hannah did not lift her head. He did not become unreachable because he was dangerous. He became unreachable because he lost the one voice he trusted, and then they kept moving him like a problem instead of mourning him like a partner. In the room, Ethan seemed to feel that truth without needing to read it. He leaned back in his chair and let the silence rest between them like something holy. "I know what it is to be treated like the part of your story people wish would end faster," he said. "I know what it is to sit still while strangers decide whether your pain still has a use." At that, Rex's front legs eased. Not all the way. Just enough for the weight of him to shift out of defense and into weariness. He lowered himself to the mat with a slow, careful motion and rested his chest on the floor, still facing Ethan. It was not surrender. It was something rarer. It was the first trace of rest. By late morning, the shelter had settled into that strange half-rhythm common to places built around waiting. Phones rang at the front desk. A delivery truck rattled past on the road outside. Somewhere down the hall, a younger dog let out a sharp, hopeful bark whenever footsteps approached, still naive enough to believe every sound might be rescue. But in the side room, time moved differently. It moved by breaths. By the faint scrape of claws on rubber. By the way Ethan kept his voice low and steady, as if he were speaking not only to Rex, but to every part of him that had learned to flinch before it learned to trust. The shepherd remained on the mat, chest down, head lifted, eyes fixed on the man across from him. He had not drifted to sleep. He was too disciplined for that, too watchful. Yet the hard edge had left his body by degrees, and those degrees mattered. Hannah noticed them when she brought in a fresh bowl of water and set it along the wall, careful not to crowd the room. Mercer noticed them when Rex did not rise in alarm at the sound of the door opening. Even the fluorescent light beyond the doorway seemed less cruel now that one small lamp had been allowed to glow inside. Ethan heard Hannah kneel and set the bowl down. "Thank you, doctor," he said. "You are welcome," she replied, then hesitated. "Mr. Cole, I should tell you something else. We found the older handler notes. His first partner was a Marine Staff Sergeant named Daniel Voss, killed overseas 6 years ago. After that, Rex was reassigned twice, then retired early. The reports got shorter after that. Less about grief, more about behavior." Ethan absorbed the words in silence. His fingers rested on the old glove in his lap. "That will do it," he said at last. "Men write what they can measure. Dogs carry what they cannot." Hannah gave the faintest exhale, not quite a laugh, not quite sadness, and stood to leave them again. The latch clicked softly behind her. For a while neither Ethan nor Rex moved much. The room held warmth in pockets, mostly near the lamp and along the vent by the floor. Outside, winter light pressed pale and thin against the narrow window. Ethan tilted his head, listening to the shepherd's breathing as though it were a radio transmission from very far away and very worth hearing. "Daniel Voss," he repeated quietly. "You remember him?" Rex's ears shifted. Ethan nodded once, more to himself than to the dog. "Of course you do. Men like that leave a mark." He leaned forward and rested his forearms on his knees. "I had a gunnery sergeant once. Samuel Keene. Toughest man I ever knew. Smelled like shaving cream and diesel fuel. Could make a room straighten up just by clearing his throat. Taught me that courage is not noise. It is staying." The last word lingered in the room. Staying. It landed somewhere deep. Rex rose, not suddenly, but with a cautious purpose that made the air tighten around him. He took one step forward, then another, closing the space between mat and chair in increments small enough to be brave. Ethan did not move to meet him. That was his gift. He let the dog own every inch of the distance. Rex stopped within arm's reach. His nose hovered near Ethan's boot, then lifted toward the hem of the marine green coat. He breathed in leather, wool, cold air, coffee, the faint mineral scent of old scars, and beneath it all that same familiar thing that had reached him through steel bars earlier. Not fear. Not force. Belonging. Ethan spoke so softly the words felt more like breath than sound. "You do not have to earn your life in this room." Rex's head dipped. The shepherd touched his nose once, gently, to the leather glove on Ethan's knee. It was a small act, almost nothing from the outside. But Hannah saw it through the window and pressed her hand to her mouth. Mercer, standing a few feet behind her, did not say a word. He only removed his cap and held it against his chest without knowing he had done it. Ethan stayed very still. His throat worked once before he found his voice again. "There you are," he whispered. "I knew you were still in there." Then slowly, giving the dog every chance to change his mind, he turned his hand palm up and lowered it from his knee until it rested open beside the chair. No reaching. No demand. Just an open hand in a warm patch of light. Rex stared at it for a long second, then lowered himself back to the floor, this time not across the room, but at Ethan's feet. The old shepherd did not lean against him yet. He was not ready for that. But he lay close enough that their breaths began to find the same rhythm, and in a building that had nearly mistaken despair for danger, that quiet little harmony felt like the first honest miracle of the day. The afternoon light never truly reached the back of the building. By 3 o'clock, the narrow window in the side room held only a washed gray sky and the faint reflection of the lamp in the corner, amber and steady like something refusing to give up its post. Rex had not left Ethan's feet for more than a few cautious laps to the water bowl and back again. Each time he returned, the distance between them grew smaller by inches, as if trust were not a choice made once, but a bridge laid down one plank at a time. Ethan remained in the metal chair, shoulders squared out of habit, one hand resting open on his knee, the other loosely holding the old leather glove. He had long ago learned that wounded hearts, human or otherwise, could hear impatience even when a voice stayed gentle. So he gave Rex what the world rarely had: time. Mercy measured not in speeches, but in staying put. Hannah came in around 3:15 with a paper cup of coffee and a small container of plain chicken from the break room refrigerator. The smell reached Rex first. His ears lifted. His eyes followed the sound of the plastic lid coming off. Hannah crouched by the wall and set the food down with care. "No pressure," she said, though the words were really for both of them. Ethan gave a faint smile at the scent of coffee drifting near him. "You are a kind woman, Doctor." "I am a tired woman," she said softly, then glanced at Rex. "Kindness is just what tired looks like. When it does not quit." Mercer stood in the doorway with a clipboard tucked under one arm, trying to keep his face neutral and failing. "Paperwork office called," he said. "They want an update before 5. They asked whether this is a delay or a recommendation for release to foster evaluation." Ethan turned his head toward the voice. "And what did you tell them?" Mercer looked from the Marine to the shepherd lying at his boots. "I told them I needed another hour." Ethan nodded once. "That was decent of you." Mercer shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. "Do not make too much of it." But the truth had already begun to work on him. Men who lived around procedures sometimes forgot they still had souls until one difficult afternoon asked them to use one. Hannah stepped back toward the door, leaving the chicken where Rex could reach it without crossing the room too quickly. The shepherd remained down for a long moment, eyes moving from the food to Ethan and back again, as if some old command was still holding him in place. Ethan heard the faint tremor in his breathing. "Go ahead," he said. "You do not need permission to be hungry." The sentence landed with more tenderness than instruction. Rex rose slowly and approached the dish, but he did not eat right away. He lowered his nose, took in the scent, then turned back toward Ethan before taking the first bite. The gesture was small, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. It was not about food. It was a check-in. A quiet, instinctive glance that asked the only question grief ever really asks. "Are you still here?" Ethan answered the only way that mattered. He stayed. Rex ate then, not greedily, but with the solemn focus of an old working dog whose body still remembered discipline even when his life had fallen apart. The room filled with the simple sounds of it. Soft chewing. The rustle of the paper container. Ethan's steady breathing. Mercer looked away first, clearing his throat as if a speck of dust had found him. Hannah pretended to study the chart on her clipboard, though her eyes had gone bright. When Rex finished, he drank deeply from the water bowl, then returned to Ethan without being called. This time he did not stop at the Marine's boots. He stood close enough that the warmth of his coat reached Ethan's hand. Ethan felt it at once and let his fingers remain where they were, palm open in the pool of lamplight. "Your move, brother," he said softly. Outside, a kennel door clanged somewhere down the hall. The sharp metal note cut through the building and snapped the room tight as wire. Rex flinched. His body stiffened. One paw shifted back. The old fear rose quick and cold through him, not loud, but immediate. Hannah's head lifted. Mercer straightened in the doorway. Ethan did not move an inch. "Stay with me," he said, voice low as dusk. "It is only a sound. It is not the past." Rex stood frozen, chest working, ears pinned halfway back, caught between the room he was in and rooms that had hurt him before. Then Ethan lowered his hand the final few inches until it rested, still open, against the floor beside his boot. No reaching. No trap. Just a place to come if he wanted one. Rex looked at that hand for what felt like a very long time. Then, with all the gravity of a soldier laying down his weapon at the feet of someone he had decided to trust, the old shepherd stepped forward and placed his head gently into Ethan Cole's waiting palm. The moment Rex placed his head in Ethan's palm, the room seemed to exhale. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to soften the edges of the day. Ethan's hand stayed exactly where it was, steady against the rubber floor, his fingers curving only slightly into the coarse warmth of the old shepherd's fur. He did not pat him the way strangers do when they want credit for kindness. He simply let his hand rest there, receiving the weight of a trust that had cost the dog almost everything to offer. Rex's eyes closed for one brief second, then opened again, as if even peace had to be tested before it could be believed. Hannah turned her face away toward the hallway under the excuse of checking the time, but the movement was slower than necessary. Mercer stared at the scene in silence, clipboard forgotten at his side. He had worked in county shelters long enough to stop expecting miracles to look like the movies. They usually looked small. Paper cups of water. Last-minute signatures. A frightened animal choosing, against every reason, not to retreat. This looked like that. Small and holy at once. The rest of the afternoon passed in careful grace. Hannah called the administrative office and bought them a little more time with the calm authority of a woman who had decided, without saying so directly, that she was done letting forms outrank truth. Mercer updated the file with hands that moved slower than usual. Positive response to calm male contact. Reduced defensive posture. Accepting proximity. Candidate for emergency foster reassessment. The words were thin compared to what had actually happened in that room, but they were enough to keep the clock from closing its fist. Ethan remained seated on the metal chair as shadows lengthened and the weak winter light in the window faded from gray to steel blue. The lamp in the corner carried more of the room now. Its amber glow settled over Rex's shoulders, over Ethan's boots, over the old glove, still draped across one knee like something left by another generation to remind this one how to endure. At one point Hannah brought in a faded blanket from the storage closet, washed so many times it had become softer than fabric had any right to be. She set it near Ethan's feet. Rex sniffed it, then circled once and lay down half on the blanket, half against Ethan's boots, as if still unwilling to trust comfort unless it came with contact. Ethan felt the shift and let out the smallest breath. "That is better," he murmured. "Nobody should have to rest on cold concrete if there is another choice." Later, when the building quieted and the office staff thinned out, Mercer stepped into the room and leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. The hardness in him had eased, though men like him rarely knew how to show that without sounding awkward. "Mr. Cole," he said, "there is something you should know. Emergency foster release is possible, but not tonight. Too much paperwork. Earliest would be tomorrow morning, provided the final behavior check stays like this through the night." Ethan nodded once. "Then I will stay through the night." Mercer frowned. "You cannot sleep in a county evaluation room." Ethan turned his face toward him, calm as ever. "Then I will sit through the night." Before Mercer could answer, a metal cart rolled somewhere down the hall and bumped against a kennel latch with a hard, sudden clang. The sound tore through the building sharp as winter air. Rex jerked awake from the edge of rest, muscles knotting under his coat. His head lifted. His breathing quickened. The old fear was back in a heartbeat, not because the room had lied to him, but because pain has a long memory and often wakes before reason does. Hannah looked up from the desk outside. Mercer straightened. Ethan did the only thing he had done right all day. He stayed. He lowered his hand to the shepherd's neck and let his palm rest there, firm and warm. "You are all right," he said, voice deep and even, carrying no trace of panic. "It is a cart. It is a building. It is not the place you lost him." The words fell gently into the shaking air. Rex did not settle at once. Healing rarely moved that fast. But he turned his head toward Ethan's voice instead of toward the door. That mattered. He drew in one breath, then another, following the man's calm like a rope laid out in darkness. Ethan kept his hand where it was. "Listen to me," he said softly. "You are not being moved tonight. You are not being left tonight. I am still here." And slowly, with the grave obedience of an old Marine hearing an order he still wanted to believe, Rex lowered his head back down until it rested across Ethan's boot, choosing the sound of one faithful voice over the noise of every fear that had come before. Dawn came softly to the county building, not with beauty exactly, but with mercy. The first light slipped through the narrow window in a pale ribbon, turning the steel blue of night into the washed silver of early morning. Somewhere in the front office, a coffee maker clicked on. Tires hissed over wet pavement outside. The world was beginning again in ordinary sounds, and in the side room at the end of the hallway, Ethan Cole had not moved much at all. He was still in the metal chair, shoulders stiff from the long night, one hand resting near the edge of the blanket, the old leather glove folded in his lap. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion had found them both. Not full sleep. Men like Ethan did not sleep hard in unfamiliar places and dogs. Like Rex did not surrender to rest without checking the room first. But sometime in those small hours between sorrow and mourning, the old shepherd had shifted closer and laid the length of his body along Ethan's boots, heavy and warm and real. It was the first time either of them had trusted the dark in a very long while. Hannah found them like that just after 6:30. She stood in the doorway with a paper cup of coffee warming her hands and did not speak for several seconds. Under the amber lamp, the picture was almost too tender for the building that held it. The blind Marine, chin lowered against his chest, not fully asleep but at peace enough to drift. The retired shepherd stretched across the faded blanket, one paw resting against Ethan's boot as if even in rest he meant to keep watch. Hannah set the coffee down quietly on the counter and turned away before her eyes betrayed her. Mercer arrived a few minutes later with the morning file packet in his hand and stopped short when he saw them. The practical language of the shelter had little use for scenes like this. It knew how to count vaccination dates and behavior notes and county liability. It did not know what to do with the sight of two discarded lives choosing, in the dark, not to leave each other. "Well," Mercer said at last, voice rough with sleep and something gentler, "I suppose that answers the overnight evaluation." Hannah gave him a look over her shoulder. "You think?" He let out a quiet breath and opened the folder. The paperwork was simple in the way important things sometimes are. Emergency foster transfer. Conditional release. Follow-up veterinary appointment in 72 hours. Home suitability waiver due to disability accommodation. Hannah walked to Ethan and touched his shoulder lightly. "Mr. Cole." He woke fast, but not startled, hand instinctively brushing the blanket near Rex before anything else. "Doctor." "It is morning," she said, and there was warmth in her voice now that had not been there the day before. "And if you still want him, the papers are ready." Ethan went very still. Beside his boots, Rex lifted his head and listened. A long second passed, then another. Ethan swallowed once and nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "I still want him." Mercer stepped inside with a clipboard and pen. "Then let us do this before somebody in administration remembers how to say no." The signature took only a few moments, Ethan writing slowly but with the firm hand of a man who had signed enough forms in service to know when one mattered. Hannah read each line aloud, and he answered in that same calm voice that had first reached Rex through steel bars. Beside him, the shepherd rose to his feet and stood close, shoulder brushing Ethan's knee, not out of uncertainty anymore, but out of choice. When the last page was done, Mercer crouched by the storage cabinet and pulled out a plain leather lead, softened by years of use. He hesitated before handing it over. "For what it is worth," he said, not looking directly at Ethan, "I do not think he was waiting for a rescue. I think he was waiting for someone who spoke his language." Ethan took the lead in both hands and ran his fingers over the worn leather. Then he smiled, small and tired and true. "Sometimes that is the same thing." Hannah opened the side room door and morning air drifted faintly down the hall from the front entrance, carrying the scent of rain on pavement and fresh coffee and the clean, ordinary promise of a day no longer shaped by endings. Ethan rose carefully from the chair. Rex stood at once, close at his side, alert but calm, like a Marine returning to formation after too many years alone. Ethan rested one hand lightly at the dog's neck, and together they stepped into the hallway. No music played. No one applauded. There was only the hum of lights, the creak of boots on old tile, and the quiet sound of a life being given back. At the front door, Ethan paused as Mercer reached past him to push it open. Cold morning air touched his face. Rex leaned slightly against his leg, steady and sure. Ethan turned his head toward the dog and spoke the words like a promise, not a command. "Come on, brother. Let us go home." And this time, when they crossed the threshold, neither one of them went out alone. In this deeply moving tale of loyalty, loss, and quiet redemption, a blind U.S. Marine walks into a county shelter and meets a retired German Shepherd K9 on the morning his life is about to end. What follows is one of those unforgettable animal stories where grief is recognized before it is explained, and mercy arrives not with noise, but with patience. As the Marine and the K9 begin to trust each other inside a cold evaluation room, The story unfolds with cinematic emotion, American heart, and the kind of healing that makes animal stories so powerful for viewers who believe no soul should be abandoned. Through silence, memory, and one faithful word, this journey reveals how a wounded serviceman and a forgotten working dog become each other's reason to keep going, turning animal stories into something larger than rescue and more lasting than pity, with the shelter veterinarian and the warden watching in disbelief. The bond between the Marine and the German Shepherd grows into a portrait of grace, proving why animal stories about second chances, military honor, and human compassion continue to resonate so deeply. If you are drawn to emotional animal stories filled with hope, trust, and the gentle miracle of being chosen when the world has given up, this story of a Marine and a K9 finding their way home belongs among the most heartfelt animal stories you will ever hear. Character 1. A white U.S. Marine veteran, about 38 years old, rugged face, short military haircut, calm expression, olive green field jacket, plain dark shirt, realistic skin texture, front-facing portrait, cinematic natural light. Authentic American look, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2. A 7-year-old full-body German Shepherd K9, strong athletic build, sable and tan coat, alert ears, amber eyes, noble stance, realistic fur texture, standing pose for reference, cinematic natural light, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, authentic working dog appearance.